DACA, 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 DACA. Lots of DACA this week. What does it really mean, and do you know what it stands for yet?
The Dan York State of Mind program is brought to you in part by Lookout Rhode Island and Takeo Comfort Solutions.
I think it would actually be fascinating if we just went down Main Street anywhere within the sound of the signal or the view of this picture and asked people, what does DACA mean? You got to practice it, but once it gets ingrained, that acronym is somewhat self-explanatory. But I'll let you figure it out, and then I'll tell you at the end of the show. We have a guest here this evening returning to actually give us a serious analysis of this program and what the president prior did and why, and what the president current did and who knows why. At the same time, this thing seems to be kind of, I don't know, softening because Donald Trump's attention has moved on to something else. So it's kind of a roller coaster. Glad to have you aboard. Thanks for coming on in on this Thursday evening. So you saw the original headlines earlier in the week. The president was scheduled early this week to announce that he was going to end the DACA program. By the way, it's deferred action for childhood arrivals. Got it? Write that down. And I don't think a lot of you understand exactly what that means, but I'll tell you, there was a lot of reaction worldwide, nationally, and of course our own delegation. Lexi put together a little montage. You'll have to have a 90-inch screen to actually read this stuff, but it reflects kind of the, press release syndrome reaction. And of course, Democrats came together the other night to just tee off on Donald Trump, and I think, as is the case with politics in this state and in this country, the pendulum swings wildly both ways, and people lose their minds and carve their own political, stake in the ground. And people who really don't have a lot of specific responsibility, like the state treasurer, Seth Magazine, are talking about Donald Trump's hatred and the like. It just adds to, I think, most of us who are in the middle of most issues trying to figure out if there's any sanity here. This is a program, though, I think that most people in America support. They support it. You support it. I can't find anybody that wants to run some 21-year-old that's gone to school, pursuing a degree, and looks like a productive tax-paying citizen out of the country. Here's a wrap-up.
No second thoughts.
President Trump insists the DACA program created by former President Barack Obama in 2012 was unconstitutional. So he says that's why he's handing it over to Congress to pass a law.
I hope they do. I certainly hope they do.
But now there's a backlash. 15 states, led by Washington, New York, and Massachusetts, have announced they are filing a lawsuit against the federal government. California's Attorney General says he will file his DACA lawsuit soon.
We need to make sure that everyone who is here has a path to earn it over time.
Facebook CEO Mark Zuckerberg held a live chat with some dreamers today who are not sure what happens next.
I am American. I feel American. But there's also this weight that comes with it, that even though you feel American, you're constantly told this country might not want to accept you. So how do you plan for that? How do you plan to one day not be able to work? How do I sign a lease in a few months if I don't know if in a few months I'll have a job?
I'm gonna go to work. I'm gonna do what I gotta do.
Beatriz San Juan, a government worker and college student, says these are emotional times.
There was a lot of people that are very sad, very angry, and I came home and my siblings were, there was a silence, an awkward silence, but I know that we will pull through this.
Deborah Gonzalez is a professor of law and directs the Immigration Law Clinic at Roger Williams University. Of course, the law school there is the oversight organization for the clinic itself specifically.
Yes, yes.
Welcome. You are a great resource for us on this. There is a development, by the way. You'll remember, first let's throw this tweet up from the other day, the 6-month I might revisit. After all the hullabaloo, he's more or less suggesting that if Congress can't fix this program, he'll revisit it. Of course, the only way he would revisit it or take action on it would be through executive order, which is what he's complaining is faulty and trying to fix. And then today, I just showed Deb the tweet. We didn't get a chance. It just came up a couple hours ago from our broadcast time. He writes, for all those DACA that are concerned about your status during the 6-month period, you have nothing to worry about. No action.
They didn't have anything to worry about to begin with. They were protected under DACA.
Right. Reportedly, Nancy Pelosi wanted some tweeting assurance. They had a big moment with the president on the budget, or actually the debt ceiling and Harvey funding, and they had a little kumbaya moment, and she asked for a little bit of tweet love from Donald Trump on this particular issue, reportedly. But
I am feeling the love right
but
now.
it's the sarcasm is dripping. The redundancy of this is laughable. It's like he doesn't even know what the process is or what he's doing.
Which is scary, right? Because we're talking about the President of the United States, the person that represents you and me. And he doesn't know for himself that these kids were protected for the next 6 months under DACA anyway. That is disturbing. We should all be worried. Someone
would probably nudge him and say, by the way, boss, you know, but maybe they don't anymore. They just let this kind of stuff fly. Let's see if we can wind this sucker back and talk a little bit about the process and where we've been. President Obama issued this in 2012, and it was for those who had been brought to the country, young people brought to the country prior to 2007, if I understand it correctly. Right. And really all it did was send a signal that the federal government was not going to seek out or prosecute students, young people, who were just, you know, managing their business, more or less. I mean, that's simply it, right?
That's it.
It's not law. It was an executive order about execution of law, or in this case, non-execution of prosecution of the law. He mentioned when he passed it, and I think this has been somewhat lost in this conversation, that he understood his executive order was a temporary measure, and he was urging Congress to get into the immigration reform conversation. Is that your understanding?
That's exactly right. It is prosecutorial discretion that the Department of Homeland Security, the executive branch, has to determine who they're going to prioritize when they're deporting people. Are we going to make children who have come to the United States from the age of 2, 3, 4, 6, 10 and deport them a priority, or are we going to make criminals a priority? Are we going to make those folks who have been in the United States unlawfully because they chose to be here unlawfully and have committed a crime of priority? Like, where are we? And so that's what President Obama did at the time, and he did that for government convenience. At the time, it was good for the government to not waste money on deporting these kids and set their priorities towards criminal immigrants. That was the purpose of the program.
People who don't follow it in real time and remember real time tend to think in some kind of revisionist history that Barack Obama was trying to violate the Constitution, trying to exert executive privilege over the legislature, trying to you know, kind of rework the whole deal all by himself. And if you're practical, and by the way, I didn't vote for Barack Obama either time. Not a huge fan here, but the truth is, that's all he did, as you've explained.
That's all he did. And again, you said it correctly originally, right, that it was a temporary measure. It was just really taking this group of people, this group of immigrants who had been in the U.S. unlawfully, and saying to them, listen, we're not going to touch you for now. We're going to hold off because you were here through no fault of your own. You're young. You've gone through our school systems. We have made you an American, and therefore we're not going to give priority to deporting you. We're going to allow you to live here, and we'll see until when. With the hopes that Congress would have passed the DREAM Act, or that Congress would have acted on immigration reform, which we had been hoping for during the Obama administration. I voted for Obama on that promise. I was very disappointed by it not happening, and it didn't happen, and so here we are now.
So the DREAM Act, I think it's fair to say, would be a subset of total immigration reform. The DREAM Act would allow this group of young people, the DACA market, if you will, permanent chill pills, and, and a path, a long path, but a path nonetheless to citizenship.
So I haven't read what the DREAM Act said. I have to be honest with you.
There's a new version now.
Right,
we can talk about that.
Which I haven't seen and don't know what it says. But as I understand it, it's just that. It's immigration reform only for this subset of immigrants. As I understand it, the DREAM Act would not resolve the issues of the undocumented people that are living here who came as adults.
Right. And the other thing the president tried to do was DACA, which was to create the same comfort zone for the parents of these kids.
Right.
Circuit Court struck that down.
They struck it. They struck. Well, so they didn't really strike down DAPA. What they did was they put in an injunction, a preliminary injunction,
right.
so that it couldn't even get off the ground.
Got it. Right. Good. Technical terms are important.
I'm
here.
sorry, that
Well, no,
the lawyer in me.
No, but that's important because people need to understand the differences, and I made that mistake. It wasn't struck down. There was an injunction placed so that it could not be effective.
Right.
And of course, right now we have attorneys general in a handful of states, a dozen states that had been suing this White House, litigating against this White House, to remove what President Obama had done, and that is the pressure that the Justice Department, Jeff Sessions, our Attorney General, was putting on the president, suggesting that either they wouldn't or couldn't, not sure exactly which, defend the United States of America against, say, the state of Texas, who was suing on this particular matter.
So as I understand Jeff Sessions' position, it is that he had to undo DACA 2012 because he believed that if Texas and these other states sued, that they would win on the same premise as the extended DACA occurred in 2015. And on that premise, he thought, well, this is going to get struck down if Texas and other states sues anyways, why continue with the program? And
right.
So as a result, that was his reasoning. I think the problem with that...
Hold on. You're going to give me a good analysis,
yeah.
and I have to pause. We'll find out what the problem with that is when we come back. Stay with us.
Many of our dreamers came to this country when they were 1 or 2 years old. They had no say in the matter. They had no choice. They have lived here. They've grown up in this country. This is the only country they know.
Mayor Lorza, makes a good point there. I think a lot of his sanctuary politics are more than provocative, and we can have some debate on that. I'm not buying a lot of his act, to be honest with you. But on this particular matter, that is actually factually true, and it's the basis of this conversation. So you were elaborating.
So what I was saying was, right, we were talking about that Jeff Sessions' reason for undoing DACA was this whole, the possibility of this lawsuit and how it's likely that the government would win anyway, so why even bother? Let's not spend money on a lawsuit. But, the problem with that is if the Fifth Circuit said, and his whole basis is on the decision that the Fifth Circuit made on the preliminary injunction from extended DACA in 2015. So if the Fifth Circuit said that DACA 2015 was a law, and that was the problem with it, and that President Obama didn't have authority to do that because what he really did was enact a law without going through Congress, then you have to say that DACA 2012 is a law as well, and that would require the government to go through the proper process as is required by the Administrative Procedures Act to put it out for notice and comment as to whether or not we should do away with DACA 2012.
In other words, you need a legislative response.
Yes.
Right.
And he didn't do that.
Right. Well, you would be you'd be a great talent to be sitting there in front of Federal Circuit and maybe Supreme Court judges, arguing that very notion. But I also think that Jeff Sessions is throwing up some phony baloney because it's philosophy more than legal technical arguments here. It's a philosophy that he has an immigration philosophy that I think is a whole lot more conservative or stringent than even President Trump, who seems to be kind of, stuck between what he thinks is his base's need to send people packing and build a wall. The politics of this thing are really interesting. And we'll get to that in the next segment, even though you don't really like the you always say you don't like the politics, and then you lay the lumber. So, so I'm not so sure about that. But the technical issues involved with DACA right now, so that people have a practical understanding of what they're up against, are what? I mean, they've got 6 months. We've got this.
No. They don't have 6 months.
They have a 30-day until October 5th to renew.
Today is October 7th. They now have 28 days.
Gotcha.
28 days to renew.
They have, and it's uncertain who will be renewed. If say, because all of these were 2-year renewals, and you had to get renewed on a 2-year basis, correct?
Right.
So those who know they're kind of up against it by the 6-month window ought to be in by October 5th and get their applications in.
Right.
Those who had a year and a half,
they're out.
But there is no definitive timeline as to who's in and who's out, right?
Well, so all of those who can apply. So if your DACA expires before March 5th or on March 5th, as I read the memo, 2018, they can apply to renew, and they must do so by October 5th.
But if they expire on March 6th,
they're out.
They can't be on October 5th.
Tough balonies.
I see. And by the way, don't think if you're one of the double the number of DACA qualified folks who thought about applying for the status, don't bother.
Don't bother because it's no longer going to be accepted.
It's no longer there for you.
Understanding that the memo that was put out by the Department of Homeland Security was very clear that even these renewals that are going to go in presumably before October 5th are going to be adjudicated on a case-by-case basis.
There ought to be a deluge of applicants.
I can only imagine. I can only
and
imagine.
The bureaucracy of this could last, we talked about this on the radio the other day, could last a really long period of time. So if you get in with an application prior to October 5th, you very well may have 2.5 years-ish. Could be, who knows,
before
or more.
you. So presumably there are about 200,000 DACA applicants who would probably qualify, right, for this extension as of up to October 5th. The other 600,000 DACA recipients are out of luck.
And the documentation from Homeland Security indicates, or the memoranda indicates that those people really ought to prepare to leave the country. The political rhetoric is all over the map, and the president suggesting no enforcement. I don't know if he's going to extend that kind of tweet dialogue past March 5th. 2 days ago, he suggested that he would revisit it. The whole thing is a mess, and it leaves people in a bad state.
It's laughable, but it's not laughable because it's not funny, right? We're talking about 600 kids who have contributed, 600,000, excuse me, thank you, 600,000 that have contributed to our economy, 600,000 who want to make this a better country, 600,000 who have served, maybe not all, in our military, who may have even given their life, I don't know. How fair is that we're doing that to these kids? Like, to me, it's mind-boggling. It's mind-boggling that the president tweets this morning that for 6 months he's not going to do anything. He couldn't do anything anyways. They have DACA. They're protected.
Right.
What was he going to do? Nothing. He couldn't because they'd sue.
All right. So, first of all, some advice on our webpage at foxprovidence.com. Professor Gonzalez has some thoughts that she's put together, just things that DACA qualified young people should be thinking about, kind of a how to navigate through this process. Of course, you can always contact the Immigration Law Clinic at Roger Williams University. When we come back, though, the very nuanced politics of this and where this might end up. Stay with us. So a political analysis on where DACA is going to be is complete hypothesis. The challenge here is that the president has not indicated that he wants to see a DACA legislative solution all by itself. He wants it tied to overall immigration reform, and we know how long that conversation. It's like I said the other day, the old Rocky movie. It's like chasing a chicken. You know, it's just like you just can't get your hands on it. Congress has not been able to get their hands on the entire immigration law package. But we know what total immigration reform means for Donald Trump: the wall. So already the Republicans got a punch in the chin this week because they thought the wall funding, at least partial wall funding, would be tied to the debt ceiling extension. Donald Trump in the meeting yesterday just decided to go Harvey way and leave them kind of hanging there. They still seem to want to have immigration reform totality as a goal, so too that they have a health care reform package, and they couldn't get that done. Which tells me that my prediction is I'll invite you back, you know, maybe before if you'll come, but even in March, and we'll be sitting here saying, okay, what do we do now that the thing is expired and we don't have any action? Because it seems to me that a standalone bill, although the goal of some, ain't going to happen.
I don't think so.
And so where's that going to leave us and the constituents that you serve every day and the people that most Americans want to see thrive? What happens to those kids, those young adults?
So it's interesting, right, because the memo that came out by the Department of Homeland Security says that they will not share this information that they've received from DACA recipients,
their data
or data of the family, with Immigration Customs Enforcement, unless there would be a reason to issue what's called a notice to appear, a charging document to start removal proceedings. Anybody who is in the United States unlawfully is a reason to start removal proceedings.
Right.
So that seems like a comment that is backhanded to me at best. Why would you say that you're not sharing it, and in the same sentence say, only if we have good cause to issue this document so that we can start removal proceedings?
You know, there's been a lot of demagoguery on both sides, and even Governor Raimondo was just way over the top the other day. The Attorney General doesn't have any understanding of the law, doesn't explain what his lawsuit joint is all about. He's political garbage in my mind. You don't have to comment on that.
I'm not going to.
But the truth is, though, university presidents, political leadership will get their collective act together in force, state to state to state, at least in this region, and fight the federal government.
And they have.
Yeah, and so this will be, so we'll see how much real temerity exists on the federal side to actually pursue DACA kids, students, young adults working, while the state governments are saying, we're going to do everything to protect them. It's going to be a thundercloud or just this dissipating cloud. Which one? I only got a minute.
I don't understand how states are going to protect these kids, right? I don't understand that. Your original question to me is, what do we do on March 6th? And what I would say, and what I say to everybody who's a DACA recipient, if you are going to expire DACA as of March 6th, you have to go seek the advice of an immigration attorney. Please, please, do not go see a notario. You know, people who do accounting and then they give you whatever at their storefront are not lawyers. You need to go see an immigration lawyer who can then properly advise you as to whether or not you have relief available to you. That is so important. Kids need to start looking into, is there relief available for me? Is there something I qualify for? And if they do,
meaning a program that isolates,
some sort of relief,
you.
yes, some sort of immigration application that they can file for where they'd be eligible for it.
And or just keep something in process.
Do something. Don't stay idle. Although I don't think that a lot of these DACA kids are going to stay idle. My experience has been that these DACA kids are really astute. And they're really going to fight for their rights. And so they should be.
All right. Go to foxprovidence.com. The professor's got a little how-to. Some of that. Thanks.
You're welcome.
Final word when we come back. I thank you. More positive stuff tomorrow night. Dedication of Air Force veterans will be our subject matter, and also a little sports talk. You know, Red Sox controversy, stealing signs. And by the way, the Patriots reportedly are back in action. Right, Kev? See you tomorrow on the radio, too, at 3 on WPRO. Thanks for watching. Good night.